Hi there. My name is David Batsoffen and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. At the moment, I'm doing a series called In Conversation With, and today I'm going back, as they say in the radio industry, back through a tunnel of time, back to a softer, gentler time, back to the late 1960s, when a song hit the airwaves and the opening line was, "It's a strange, strange world we live in." And with me today is the writer and singer of that song, David Marks. David, how are you?
Well, I'm all the better for seeing you and talking to somebody. I don't see humans. I don't see humans out here.
Yeah, finally, the words of that song. Everybody asks you who Master Jack was, and everything around that. Those two words. Now we just want to know why you said then it was a strange, strange world back in 1967. Now in 2020, it's a strange, strange world, Dave.
It is indeed. Hey? Now, Master Jack, if I can paraphrase Bob Dylan, is about 3 minutes.
But
that's all I can tell.
That's all
I don't know who he is.
But it wasn't a hit for you. It was a hit for Four Jackson and Jill, wasn't it?
Yeah, and a minor hit for Trini Lopez and a few others. And it's been covered over 40 times now. So I'm proud to say there were hits in Belgium, Germany, Holland.
You were better known than Rodriguez.
Well, neither of us were known at the time.
But, I think that Master Jack has had a similar sort of icon status as Louis Louis. If you remember that song from, I think it was the 50s, where even the group didn't know when they were asked what their lyrics were about, they said, we hadn't the vaguest idea. We were so stoned when we recorded that. The FBI opened case files. They thought they were communists. All sorts of strange stuff happened around them. Did you have any inkling when you wrote Master Jack that it would go on to be the iconic song that it actually became?
No, not at all. It was one of many songs I was writing, underground. And when I say underground, not politically speaking, well, relatively political. I was working on the gold mines and drawing my cartoons and writing these wordy poems or these songs that my friends used to stick on the notice board at boarding school and on the mines in the hostel. But it wasn't, it was one of many songs I'd written and I was just pouring them out. So exactly, I remember writing some of it in my notebook underground.
Right.
While my comrade mine workers were lashing and earning 35 cents a day, I was sitting in the dark with my headlamp writing songs. Because I was a white Mullen.
Yeah.
Half the age of the guys that have been working underground for 30 years, but I was the boss. So I guess Master Jack sort of took shape. And then incidentally, a very interesting thing is that I saw a movie called The Ship of Fools.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
1964, a devastating film about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. And I came home and I was completely shattered. And I actually remember sitting on my bed trying to write about the movie, and then the song that I had been writing underground came to mind. But to answer your question, it was one of Mountains of Men had already been on the charts, 66. Fairy Gold, Nick Taylor had recorded, and it ended up on the island in the detainees' library, by the way. We're not too sure who ordered Fairy Gold or Mountains of Men, But an interesting thing is that mountains of men were scratched out in the library on Robben Island. So whoever detainee ordered it couldn't listen to it. But why I'm sketching that background is that Master Jack, by that time, lots of people were singing my songs, proudly so. Because unfortunately, there were very few white English-speaking songwriters. You know, there was a few in the rock groups, Johnny Congus, but amongst the folkies, the only person doing it was Jeremy Taylor. And although I was playing at bass in a rock and roll band, throttle jockey, I was very drawn to the words of songs. But the band I was playing in Springs and Whitbank said, no, we can't play those songs, David, because people only want to hear what they know. and that's, to this day, this is the sad indictment about South Africa. Most audiences, not their fault, history's fault. You can blame apartheid, you can blame colonialism, but South Africans really generally only want to listen to what they already know. It wasn't any different in those days. And so I didn't play my songs in the bands that I played in. But the troubadour, and this is where Dolph and you might relate, in Johannesburg, was an outlet where I used to drive up from Springs, from Welkom on my motorbike, in my Simca, to go and sing on a Tuesday at the Night Beat with my dear friend Mac, the two of us. And Ian Lawrence and Des Lindbergh and that crew were very
Ian
drawn
Lawrence there at that time as well?
Well, he was the first one to recognize that the songs I was writing had some value. Yes, he was manager of the Troubadour.
Okay.
He took over from Des, 1966, 67. No, 67. And Ian, by the way, as well, he's 82. He lives in Australia, and he's still writing songs. So that was my introduction to the wordy side of songs. But really, again, to paraphrase Bob Dylan, there are no messages in my songs. If you want to send a message, use the post office. People have to take out of a song whatever they like. That's what makes it a popular song, I think.
I suppose at the end of the day, but the Troubadour was, I mean, the beginnings of folk in Johannesburg. It was before I came up here because I was still in Port Elizabeth, and we had the Four Winds Folk Club, which is where you and I originally met in the latter part of the 60s through John Gregg. But I mean, there was Mel and Julian, there was Ian, as we've said, there was Des Lindbergh, yourself, a variety of different people that played, the Blundells, that played there and went on to do a lot in the folk and acoustic music genres in South Africa.
Well, absolutely. The only, as I say, the unfortunate thing, and again, it wasn't the fault of the musos, is that there were no South African English-speaking songs. Lots of Afrikaans, lots of indigenous language stuff. And, you know, we would have a folk festival, and there would only be two or three South African songs. You know?
That would be one of them.
Well, that was years later.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Colin was a bit later.
Shapley, yeah, because I remember him coming to Port Elizabeth that's when I first met Colin. So it must have been mid-70s, mid to late mid-70s, early 70s. Because I left PE in 75. So it would have been early 70s that I met him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Colin was, the irony too about South Africa, and this is, I think, quite interesting given the history of our colonial past. No blame, no regrets. And incidentally, I'm not into nostalgia.
Okay.
I'm one of those people who don't really recognize the good old days. They were wonderful. They were wonderful. I'm glad they happened the way they did for me, being in the right place at the wrong time. But what I'm getting at is that the Collins came from Malawi originally, before he went to Port Elizabeth. And John Edmund came from Zambia, and Clem Follett came from Zimbabwe, and Tony Bird came from Malawi. All these guys were gravitating towards the troubadour, 1966, 67, 68, with original songs. And there we South Africans were, you know, with respect, and wonderfully that it so happened, I admired Des and Keith and Ian. They were my gurus. But we were, the furthest we could go was We Shall Overcome. Or if I Had a Hammer, which we used to sing with revolutionary verb. But there were no South African songs. Jeremy Taylor's iconic song, Piece of Ground, was overshadowed by Ah, Please Daddy. Piece of Ground by Jeremy went on to become a PAC and ANC anthem in the 70s and 80s. But nobody knows that.
Yeah.
And he wrote that in 1961 when he was teaching in Rosettenville at St. Martin's, St. Peter's, which became St. Martin's. But anyway, the point I'm making is that Jeremy's powerful song, Piece of Ground, didn't find its way into the folk movement, which brings me to the crux of this long story. And that is, you can say anything about the government at the time, the Nats, but they were very good at what they did. Their method of isolation and dividing people made the Russians and the Afghans look like amateurs. They were really, if you got to interview Paul Erasmus, he was the security man who followed Colin and Roger, and the folkies around for many years. We've become very good friends, and he's just released a book called Foot Soldier of Apartheid. And he will tell you that the divisions within society and structures were so profound in South Africa in the 60s and 70s that it's going to take us many years to understand it. Not that we need to. We don't have to go back and reinvent the past, but the songs, the powerful songs that were being written in Port Elizabeth, Cape Town, Malawi, Zimbabwe, were where they were, and they never went further. And that's an interesting thing about segregation. It's not about color only. It was about Jews and Christians and Muslims. It was about us from the Rosettenville in the South. It was about the North. You know what I mean? And everybody had their little compartment. Very strange world indeed.
It was indeed. I know you just said you don't like nostalgia, but I want to come at you slightly out of left field, if you don't mind, Colin. I'm thinking of Colin now. Dave, what was David Marks like in matric?
Well, for a start, I must tell you, I loved school.
Okay.
I got a certificate for never missing a day officially in 4 years. I was too scared something would happen that I wouldn't know about. I made sure that I was at school every day. By the time I got to matric, I was top of our master's hit parade.
Wow.
He had a little black book, and he used to say how many cuts each of us got. Cuts meaning
In those days, they could hit people.
Buck Royneck.
Yeah.
There were very few English speakers at the boarding school, at the hostel.
Mm.
But in the trick, you know, I was playing in a rock and roll band, the boys' band in Witbank, of all places. Incidentally, we had some good players. It turned out to be years later. But I was also drum major of the cadet band.
Okay.
So, and I played first team rugby and cricket. So
I can see you in a white helmet and khakis wielding a mace in front of the cadet band, Dave.
Well, there's quite a few pictures on the website like that of me marching, doing the route marches through the town. But here's the interesting thing. In matric, I used to have to work on Saturday mornings in the market cafe, it was called, the market tea room.
Mm.
And I would earn my money, and then we would do our route marches or our rugby or cricket or whatever on a Saturday afternoon. And then Saturday evening, we'd go to the sessions in the Moth Hall and play in the band. So I was extremely fortunate, as I say, to be in the right place at the wrong time. I had access. I love military music. I didn't like the idea, as I said in one of my songs, you know, love or money, you take your chance. In love or money, you march or dance. Mm. It used to intrigue me that marching music, brass music, which I loved, and basic rock and roll were at the same pace, 118 beats a minute. Unless it was a slow march, then it was a blues.
Yeah.
And today, every single rap song is a marching song. It's 180 beats a minute. I wish they'd get away from that.
And they thought they were being new and different and groundbreaking, and they're not.
It's unbelievable. They're marching. Anyway, nothing wrong with that. Every kid loves a parade.
Yeah.
And I used to swing my mace. I loved it. I'm proud to say I became the #1 drum major in a competition in the Transvaal in 1962. I won a cup.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is that our cadet band at Witbank Tech had a swing to it.
Like the American high school marching bands.
Well, I wished we were. I'd seen pictures of them. We never had TV, but I remember pictures of the Canadian beef eaters. And the Canadian beef eaters and the African impies march very similar to music and song and dance. Well, similar, I mean, you don't do it quite like the Zulus do it. Yeah. But the swing of the army that the Americans started taking from the Native American Indians, rather than the strict British left, right, club, you know. We lost the band, our cadet band, lost the competition when I was in matric because I had replaced the ties with a braid. It was the same braid that we used to wear as ducktails. Remember those braids? They came from our when you got your master's sports or your ad valorem, whatever, that braid on the jacket. We used to use it for ties, little bow ties. So apparently we lost all our points because I had the cadet band take the braid from the bugles and their drums and put it around their neck and take the ties off. And the other thing I've only just realized these things now, by the way, going to the diaries now, and my friend Mervyn van Rooyen, the trumpeter, very dear friend from Witbank, and a jazz fanatic. He was our lead trumpeter in the band. He told me that another reason for losing was that I made the shorts. I got the cadets to hire their shorts 4 fingers above the knee. And That was not allowed because these long pants were uncomfortable against your knees. So you needed to shorten them a bit. Anyway, so that's, you asked for the matric story, and that's
And I got the matric story. Well, those were your matric, well, that was your matric year. And you seem to have had an absolute blast at school, which I was not expecting, I have to tell you, Dave.
Well, I think one of the reasons I survived at school in Witbank was because of, I never had any single, except for one guy and one girl, any particular friend, as it were. I was friends with everybody. I spoke to everybody. For some reason, the kids at school that were not part of the mainstream, like the only two Jewish kids in Witbank were my close friends.
Okay.
Or the guy that people accused of being a colored was my friend. So I just seemed to attract stray eccentric people whom I've been in touch with all these years. So I think, and by the way, I've been keeping a diary and notes since 1959.
Wow.
Since I was 14 years old. And we discovered that one a few years ago, Fran and I.
Mm.
So by the way, when I say I'm not into nostalgia, you must understand I love talking about where we've come from.
Okay.
And I like, especially going through the diaries. So it's very glib of me to say I'm not into the good old days like my friends are and my family are, because I'm so close to it.
Mm.
You know, I kept the diaries, I kept the notes, the pictures. And so therefore, it's not a new thing to me. I'm not looking back, and I certainly don't want the past to be repeated.
Mm.
You know, like Bill Colony says, we were never victims, despite being poor, despite being in a hostel full of hostile people, government supporters. We were all friends.
Okay.
And we were never victims. That's the point.
So Dave,
and, yeah.
What took you from matric? Did you go straight from school into the mines? Or was there okay. So why did you choose that, or was that path chosen for you?
Well, the last thing I wanted to ever do was go underground. My granddad had died in City Deep or Rose Deep, one of the two, underground. And I never thought of it. But my stepfather was a Greek and a very well-known coal mining and mechanical engineer. That's how he ended up working in Witbank.
Okay.
And he insisted that I go to the mines because, by the way, my schooling it was partly non-governmental, the techs in those days.
Mm-hmm.
It was a technical college. And an interesting fact is that the technical college in Witbank was where all the future miners went.
Okay.
In Middelburg, all the farmers. In Pretoria Tech, it was the commercial scene. I was in Pretoria Tech for 1 year, by the way.
Okay.
So the point I'm making is that the techs, I was a fitter and turner, the only English-speaking fitter and turner. All the English speakers somehow became electricians. So I did my fitting and turning there, and it was amazing what it taught me. So my stepfather said I had to go to the mines.
Okay.
I was very reluctant, but after 2 months, in February, March of '63, when I hadn't had a job, I just said, okay, I'll go. And that's what started it off. But when I went for my audition on the mines, here's an interesting point too. the first question they asked me was, what team rugby did I play? Not did you pass matric? Did you do it? I had an NTC3 fitting and turning. They weren't interested. They just wanted to know what position I played and in what team.
So what position did you play?
Well, being English speaking, they only put you on the wing. Because rugby in the 60s for us was an 8-man, 16-man up front Afrikaner game. And the Rooinecker were either sometimes a fly half, that's as close as you got to the scrum, but usually a fullback or a wing where you never touched the ball. The only time as a wing, the only time I ever touched the ball was to throw it in, because in those days the hookers didn't throw in the wings. And one of the rules, by the way, when we played rugby against the Barberton Police or against a rival team, they would say to me, "Hey, Engelsman, moet nie jou mond oopmaak nie, hoor." Englishmen, don't open your mouth just in case they find out that you're English, because then they'll donor you.
So, Dave, I tell you, your path and mine are not too different. I mean, I ended up on the railways as an electrician. They wanted to make me a boiler maker. And I thought, no, if I was to leave the railways, there's nowhere else that you can do boiler making. Who does boiler making? So because I finished matric without history and without maths and science. So I then went on to do N1, 2, and 3 again. So I hold 2 matric certificates, one with a distinction in maths and the other one with history and science. And then I became an electrician and eventually moved into theater and television. So your career path, how did that get you from there to Woodstock? What was the jump?
Well, it was Master Jack that opened up the doors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in those days, I didn't know anything about royalties, and I didn't care. People were singing my songs. I had 4 or 5 songs on the radio. Mainly, not incidentally, not SABC radio in the beginning. Master Jack broke that. Master Jack was the first song that the SABC played of mine. But Fairy Gold, Mountains of Men, you know, I was even accused once in Belcom for being a communist because I wrote that verse in Mountains of Men. So, you know, SABC radio wasn't the thing, but LM radio, Clacking McKay, and my later friend, Michael Mayer, and people like that would program my songs by Des Lindbergh, and not me singing, by the way, other singing, Nick Taylor, the Dominoes recorded, whatever. So getting to Woodstock came about when Master Jack broke big. And I wasn't aware of any royalties owed to me, so I borrowed. I then left the mine, 68. And I was singing at the Astra Hotel in Durban, at the Chatterbox, when Master Jack hit the charts. Ooh. Sorry.
That's all right.
Vuvuzelas.
We know what they are.
So when Master Jack broke, I was singing at the Astra Hotel. I took advantage after 5 years in the mines, 4.5 years. And I borrowed 2,000 Rand, because in those days, 1 Rand was about $2.50. And it was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money.
So I borrowed this from RCA Teal, Gerald McGrath, and decided to go overseas. I had no idea where I was going, who I was going to, I just hit the road, and it was amazing. I had some friends and family in Europe that I stayed with a bit. And then I went to America and hitched to Nashville and hitched to Newport. And And by the way, on my way to Woodstock, okay, it was unbeknown to me at that time. I was at Newport Folk Festival representing the South African Folk Music Association, your people as well, at the Newport Folk Festival in '69. And I came across John Hartford and Len Chandler, who were on the anti-apartheid boycott the Holiday Inn committee. And so I met people like that at Newport. And also, incidentally, while hitchhiking around, I went to Nashville for 3 weeks, and I proudly demoed some songs of theirs. I sung a Colin Shamley song at Hickory Studios, you know, the home of Chet Atkins.
Right.
And South African producer Billy Walker from South Africa, who produced Mickey Newbury. Anyway, I was mixing in these wonderful circles, but I just found it too mechanical. You know, writing songs for me wasn't that serious. And it wasn't just putting a polish and finding what it means. Or whatever I wrote or said, like I'm doing now, is what it is. And then I'd write it down and put a tune to it. So after 3 weeks in Nashville, I just hit the road. But here's another nice thing. While hitching and picking up lifts and all that sort of stuff, I always had my guitar, which was a nylon string Levine, by the way. Mm-hmm. And you would pick up lifts, and on the radio would play my song. But I was very cautious never to say, hey, that's my song, because they would have thought I was crazy and thrown me out the car. Yeah. So I never said that, which I find very weird. I wished I had owned up at the time. Mm. I mean, I traveled on a sound truck for 3 months on the Turtles tour before the driver, Dick Butler, who had the radio on all the time. I had to break down and I said, hey, Dick, that's my song. And he looked at me and he said, you're joking. It's my favorite song. How can it be your song? So Master Jack and Mr. Nico and Hey Mr. Mr. Nico I heard on the radio often in the South. Mm-hmm. And in the jukeboxes, by the way. Wow. I had a choice. I could choose between Master Jack on the jukebox with one dime or The Wait by the band. And of course, I chose The Wait every time. That song changed my life.
Yeah, it's 50 years, David, since The Wait. It's 50 years, I think this year or last year, since The Wait was first recorded.
It was recorded in '67. Yeah. Came out on Big Pink in '68. Yeah, and my wife's name, by the way, is Fanny. But of course, I didn't know her then.
Yeah. Right.
But years later, we made this connection that my favorite song was The Wait. But what I'm getting at is that in this traveling in the trucks and getting to Hanley Sound in Boston, which is another story, I won't get into that, via Newport Folk Festival, by the way, the lady who ran the office, a wonderful Judy Bernstein, said to me, you used to interview me on the phone. I was living in the village in New York. She was in Boston. And she'd say, okay, tomorrow night, go to the Madison Square Gardens, catch the train. This is your reference number, and go and help Bill at the Joan Baez concert or the Donovan concert. So I'd never met her, but that's how it worked on the telephone. And then I'd pitch up at the gig, take my pictures, help rig the stuff, and became very friendly with the owner, Bill Hanley, and worked on wonderful shows. And then one day, I called Judy and I say, is there any work next week? And she'd say, yes, listen, there's a festival happening that's changed venues 3 or 4 times. And it's near White Lake City in Bethel, near Woodstock. Just catch the bus and go there. So I had no idea what the festival was or was about. And I took the bus, and it took me to Bethel, and the rest is history, as they say.
Did you spend the entire time of Woodstock working there? Were you there for the entire festival?
Yeah, a few days before, I got there on the Tuesday, and I left the following Wednesday or Thursday.
Okay. I was lucky. I mean, you know, they say if you don't remember the if you don't remember the 60s, if you remember the 60s, you weren't at Woodstock. And I got to interview years later. I got to interview Richie Havens, and what a nice man, really and truly.
I brought him up.
I remember, and he arrived at the studio with the guitar, and I said, "Will you play me a song?" He said, "You would think I brought the guitar for nothing."
Did you know that I brought Richie out?
Yeah. Did
you
also not have a hand with Kinky Friedman?
Kinky Friedman, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Sean Phillips. Yes, and now Crosby, Stills and Nash I never met at Woodstock, but Richie I did meet there, very briefly.
Yeah.
I set his mic up, and my most famous picture in his book too, apparently, is of him looking towards me as I put his mic up, and I took a shot quickly. I wasn't supposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Richie was an amazing man. Sorry I interrupted you.
No, not at all. I mean, I spent an hour with him. I was truly blessed. And what a nice man, really and truly, in every sense of the word. I'd forgotten about Sean Phillips because he was on at the Linda Auditorium when he came out, and I'd interviewed him, and then he allowed me to open for his show one night. I did comedy for him because in those days I was doing stand-up, and he said to me, "Listen, you've done for me, now I'm going to do for you, so you can open for me tonight," which was really nice. And Crosby, Stills, Nash were just the coolest to watch. They really were.
Now you've just struck a chord. That opening of Sean Phillips was one of our concerts I have on tape.
You're kidding?
Yeah, so I've got you on tape. I should have a look.
Do and then burn it, David.
Yeah. No. It was a wonderful show. You know what I used to do? I must jump in and tell you this. I did it with Richie, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Sean, and Kinky, by the way. Every show. What I did was, in the international show after 94, I would always feature a local act or group. In PE, I featured Gavin Weeks and Dave Goldblum and that that crew. In Cape Town, Johnny Blundell and so on. You in Johannesburg. So the same with CSNN. Every opening act was a local act.
Yeah. No, because the opening act for CSN was the Butterfish Blues Band, which was Johnny Blundell and Robin Walsh.
It was part of what became our high band. Robin Walsh, Johnny, Tim Parr, Larry Amos as well.
Okay.
And those recordings I have too. I recorded every concert.
We're going to chat about the hidden years in a moment or two, but with the afternoon that I saw CSN, they played their first song, and then when the guitar technicians walked out, they walked out with a guitar, and you could see the group was not happy with the guitars. And the one techie stepped up to the microphone and he said, "Listen, we're sick and tired of you telling us what you're going to play." And he kicked their set list into the audience, and he said, "When we step out with your guitars, we will tell you what you are playing this afternoon." And that's what they did for the rest of the show. It was like a lucky packet for the three guys.
Lovely. No, they were lovely. It was a wonderful tour. Graham Nash rates it as one of the top 10 tours for CSNN of all time.
You know, I was lucky because I was at the press briefing, so I'd seen Graham Nash the day before, but he introduced the opening act, but nobody knew who he was because, I mean, he was a lot older than, you know, the people remember. So he stepped up and he sort of went, ladies and gentlemen, the opening act this afternoon, all the way from Johannesburg, is Butterflesh Blues Band, or Graham Walsh and Johnny Blundell. And then nobody realized that Graham Nash is now introducing these guys. He then stepped back and sat down and watched them. It was fascinating. It really and truly was. And one of the concerts that I enjoyed the most.
Well, he came out bare feet. He never wore shoes on stage because he was so tall, and he made David and Stephen look small. He never wore shoes. He kept that group together, I must add. I mean, they were all nice guys in their own way, but they didn't like each other. You know, they were like the Rolling Stones.
Like the Eagles.
No, they were three different people, and they had a business arrangement.
Yeah,
it was wonderful. Like jazz. Most jazz musicians in the band hate each other. But that adds to the whole thing.
It does indeed. But you talk about Graham not wearing shoes. I've just finished reading a book by an East London author, and the book is called Selective Hearing. The book doesn't, I mean, the title is neither here nor there, but she mentioned a particular musician who arrived at the lead character's 70th birthday party barefoot. So I phoned her and I said, are you talking about Rod Dry by any chance from Waldorf String Band? And she said, no, it's a different Rod, but Rod was at my dad's 70th. And then she sent me 3 clips of Rod and her dad playing together at his 70th, which was a year ago, I think. And Rod's still not wearing shoes. I don't think he owns a pair.
Silver Creek Mountain Band.
Silver Creek Mountain Band, yeah.
That's it. But Graham, just to quickly finish on Graham, the reason he wanted to introduce Larry and Johnny and them was that, Larry and Tim, was he loved Larry's song, Let the Sun Shine In.
Mm-hmm.
He really liked it. And I said, Graham, please come and listen to the song, because they get countless songs all the time and ideas. And he really loved that song, but I don't think he never did anything with it. So he stood at the side of the stage at the Standard Bank Arena.
That's right.
And listened to the song and thought, gee, what a great song.
I only met Larry in the latter years. He was a guest on a particular TV series I was working, and I'd never heard his music before. So he came in for the rehearsal. I loved the song, and I asked him to play it the second time, and he played it. And then my director was saying to me in my earpiece, listen, that's enough. We've got what we need. And I pulled the earpiece out and I said, Larry, would you mind doing another song? They just want to make sure that they've got everything they need. And he said, sure. And then he actually played at my 60th birthday party. He came with a rather nasty abscess on his tooth. He came and he played for me.
Oh, amazing.
So let's jump forward, let's jump back. Let's talk about the hidden years. Is this still an ongoing? I mean, this seems to be a lifelong. I don't know if it started off as a passion and it's ended up as something that's just all consuming. Just looking at your body language, the moment I showed this, it sort of went, really, do we have to talk about this? The answer is no.
We can talk about the project.
Yes.
That album was overproduced mishmash. Look, Efert Minnick, wonderful recording engineer, producer. Alan Judd, my guitar player, wonderful, but it was just overdone. It had 77 musicians on it. And that's crazy, because my songs are just me, the guitar, and maybe a percussionist or a bass player. That's it. You can't do anything else with them. Not I can't. And I'm not an entertainer. I just share the stuff I like, and my songs are among them. So that album is not. I don't like it, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'll put it away. I won't show it again.
Okay, thank you. Look, I'm not putting people down for wanting to play some of it. I still get a few royalties for it, for airtime. But the Hidden Ears project came about also partly because of Master Jack, but because I always have this thing of keeping notes. As I told you earlier, you know, from my teens, early teens, I've been writing diaries because I was always afraid of missing something, or if I did something, I wanted to share it with somebody else.
Right.
So I think going into the townships, working with jazz at Dorkey House, working with the folk movement along the coast or the folk movement in Joburg, I mean, you can't get more dispersed than the jazz on the one and the folk on the other. And then in the middle was our rock and roll, our Ramsey and Kenny and all that lot, Freedom's Children.
Yeah.
So, and there I was, and Hawk, of course, Hawk, good example. There I was setting up sound for them there, and there. So it was interesting when I played Malombo to Dave Ornelas or Spook, and they said, wow. And I said, yeah, I work with these guys every weekend from Mamelodi, just up the road, Pretoria. And so I would make tapes and notes and take pictures. And when I went into the suburbs, I would play the stuff to them. And vice versa. I've been doing that since I was on the mines. I used to take the tape recorder to the Troubadour. And I sort of stole it for a night from the mines, the mine tape recorder. Take it on the train from Springs to the Troubadours, heavy ferrograph series 7, I think. And I would walk through the streets from Park Station to the Troubadour in Hood Street and record the evening. Then I'd catch the train back to the hostel at midnight. And I'd go, and usually the guys were up in the pub getting drunk or ready to go to work at 6 o'clock. And I would play them this stuff. And I'd say, listen, guys, these are not just long-haired communist agitators. This is good music. Because they used to accuse me of being a commie, going to the coffee bars.
Okay.
But incidentally, a year or two later, 66, 67, the miners were trudging off to the Troubadour in droves. So what I'm getting at is the way that we see now, I'm only looking at this now in hindsight, perfect science, and through Lisa B's eyes, Lisa B. Lombrax, the young researcher who's done her doctorate on our collection, we only see now the importance of just sharing on a small basis that it was important to, I never thought my diaries or notes were important, but I wrote them and I was too scared to throw them away anyway, so I kept them. They now see a value in that, not for the music only, or not for the creative side, but for the entire political, social setup. So without waving the victim flag of the victims or the flag of the oppressed or the oppressors, we just have an open view from a South African boy, because that wasn't me, that was somebody else, growing up through a system that was abhorrent. I was working in a concentration camp on a Saturday and then going to a Hawk concert on a Sunday. You know, that's how our world was. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You did. But is the project still ongoing, Dave, or is it now sort of wrapped up?
Okay, so that's where we got stuck.
Yeah.
Lisa B has taken this on her own. She's been at it for years now. And they have catalogued, they have put my things into order. I mean, I'm still living in chaos here. I live in my archive. Look, it's clean and all that, but it's complete chaos. And she took 7 tons of stuff from my garage and boxes in Durban to Stellenbosch, and she took 3 tons of our stuff from Ben Siegel's archive. When Ben died, his archive and mine, because we were both third year music, have become part of the hidden years. And then we've got wonderful people, young researchers, a young Pakama Nkube who is doing her PhD on the Market Theatre Cafe. Lisa B is doing the Free People's Concerts. And sound, by the way, the history of sound. That's another thing Woodstock did for South Africa, which people don't know about. It started the whole sound in the music sound industry.
Right.
And, we were the first, with our Woodstock bins, we were the first dedicated music sound company in Africa.
Okay.
Of course, there were sound companies in the 30s with the Catharies, mainly the so-called Eastern technology and Italians. But for music dedicated sound, Bill Hanley's Woodstock bins and third year sound were the beginnings of it. So these are the research. This is what Lisa B and her team of researchers at Stellenbosch and the African Open Institute, by the way, and Volkswagen, Germany, who gave them a nice funding for 3 years. So, yeah, no, the archive seems to be thundering on.
Well, that's
wish
great.
I could do this stuff, my personal stuff now.
So what keeps David Marks busy currently?
Trying to sort out, I want to do nothing, absolutely nothing. I don't want to get up and be obligated. My new song is called No Obligation. I just want to, I've been there, done that. That's what I mean about the nostalgia thing. I'm not keen on it because I've done there. I want something new.
Okay.
So what keeps me busy is, when I say new, I'm learning and tracking ink spot songs from the 1936, 34. and
My question is
Jeremy, why? Because they have such, I don't know, I have no answer to that. Just because it's there.
Fair enough. That's a good enough answer, Dave.
We Three.
Okay.
Written in 1936. Anyway, so the what keeps me busy is trying to piece together Franny's world, my world, for no other reason. Oh, why? Okay, for the children. That's all.
Okay.
Same as you, the same as yourself or Dov. You've got to tell your stories, not necessarily for the world, as long as your children and your grandchildren know. Because this is what I've learned. My children say to me now, in my 70s, on my way to my 80s, they say to me, but Dad, I never knew that happened or this happened. Like you, I'm sure, we are so close to our children, we think they know.
Yeah.
And it's only when we're telling the story to somebody else and they say, but Dad, you never told me that.
My daughter does that to me constantly. I'll talk about somebody and she'll go, what do you mean he's a friend? I'm 34 years old. I've never heard you mention him before.
There you go. So that's why your stories, your interviews, your radio work, your play, your stand-up comedy, which I forgot about, you were very good. All that needs to be just shared with the family. And if some researcher, like I've been lucky now, wants to take it further, they can do it. But don't involve me. That's the bottom line.
Once 10 tons of, you've said 7 and 3. Wasn't there no, that was 16 tons. So there's another 6 tons of stuff that they have to remove from your environment to keep up with the lyrics of 16 tons. and to make,
Yeah,
and you can sing the song in your driveway as they take the last bucky load out, Dave.
well, to tell you the truth, yesterday, I always try and keep my chops in. I was doing Merle Travis's 16 Tons. He wrote when his dad worked on the mines in 1948. He wrote the song. He was 18.
Mm.
And 16 Tons was the very first song I ever sang at a concert, unaccompanied, when I was 10, in 1954. In 1954. So 16 Tons definitely has a ring to it.
Do you play?
Here's the other.
Yeah.
6 Ton. Yeah.
Do you play every day? Guitar, I mean.
I try. I really do. I'm always, my songs, incidentally, Dorf might find this interesting. I've always saw my songs as cartoon strips.
Okay. The Dorf that David Marks is referring to is political cartoonist Dorf Fedler. And the reason we keep bringing him up is he happens to be my father-in-law. And Dave spent time at his old studios in town. I believe there's a whole nother interview there about Dorf Studios with John Mayer and what was it, Tommy Layton in downtown Johannesburg back in the days.
Yeah, wonderful. Above the long player.
Yeah, above the long play.
There's all these little links that draw us. I mean, Dorf was a hero of mine in as early as 70, I'm very into comics. I go back to Will Eisner in the 30s, The Spirit.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got his volumes. Anyway, I'm always, the only books I ever read are comic books,
We've got,
you can tell.
My wife is the comic book collector, so when Dorf gets tired of them, they end up on a shelf in my study. And I've got Will Eisner books here. I can see them as I'm talking to you.
Yes. I've also got one somewhere. Yeah. Amazing.
Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you. It has been too long since we last spoke. So thank you so much for giving so generously of your time. If people want to find out more about the Hidden Years project, is there a website that they can go to?
Yes, it's just the Hidden Years Archive Project.
And that's what it all is?
Yeah, that's all. You can Google it. It'll bring it up.
Okay.
Stellenbosch University. The other one, my own website is thirdearmusic.com.
Great stuff.
That's 3RD.
Yeah.
3RD-music.com. Yeah.
In fact, I think, no, they can't see it. I was going to say, you can't really see it.
No, it's there.
It's there.
Thirdearmusic.com.
My guest today in conversation with has been David Marks. David, legendary to talk to you, and thank you very much for sharing your story so generously with myself and the viewers.
Thank you, Dave, and please don't forget to send Lisa B a copy.
I shall.
Otherwise, she'll chime me. Okay. Thank you.